Okay, what I'm doing here is measuring my fabric width. I'm not going to be using the border along one side, and on the other selvage there's some fairly dodgy printing, quite patchy, so I'm going to be making sure that I don't measure that either. So I'm just measuring the usable fabric width. Here I have opened the Evie spec file, and I'm going to scroll down until I find the lay plans. Now I want to cut out size 5 here, and I know that my fabric is actually less than 110 centimetres wide for usable fabric width because of that border that runs down the side. And I'm going to be sewing up view A, which is the one with the sleeves. So here I come to view A, sizes 3 to 5, 110 centimetre fabric. Now there is no lay plan for anything less than 110 centimetres. It's quite unusual for a fabric to be really, really narrow. So what I am going to do, because I don't think all my pattern pieces are actually going to fit into this lay plan, I'm going to jump from the 5 year down to the 8 year, and I'm hopeful that that lay plan will actually work for me, given that 8 year will be a bigger size pattern than the 5 year. So this is the one here that I'm going to be referencing when I start laying up and cutting out my fabric. Just something to note here about these lay plans is that they are sketched out with the fabric laid flat. So you can see the word selvage that runs along both sides of the diagram. So that's the sides of the fabric that run along the sides of the fabric throughout the whole bolt of fabric. So you'll cut raw edges down here and up here. Now this is the most economical way of cutting out a garment. It's the way they do it professionally in industry. I know that a lot of home sewers like to cut on the fold, and sometimes you don't have the space to lay your fabric out flat, and I totally get that. You'll see in a moment that I do a combination of folding my fabric over, but I only fold it as I need to fold it. I don't just fold it and then plonk the pattern pieces on top, because that's just it's just way too wasteful. And also sometimes you want to fold your fabric in half, sometimes you want to fold the sides in so that the selvage meets along the middle, and that would just be too confusing and too many lay plans. So I find that the most economical and most clear way is just to sketch it out as if it's on as if it's flat on the table, and then I will show you how to fold it as you go. Okay, so now I'm starting to lay out my pattern pieces, starting with the skirts, and I'm constantly looking at the lay plans to make sure I'm putting pattern pieces down in the right place. Usually you start with the biggest pattern pieces first, which is what I'm doing here. Cutting out the front skirt now, and I've just folded my fabric over as and when and where I need it. I have limited space here, and I find that the easiest is just to fold as you go, and it's also the most economical. And I'm using tailor's chalk to mark around the paper pattern. Some people like to use pins. There's many ways of cutting actually. Some people use a rotary cutter on a cutting mat. There's no right or wrong, just whatever you prefer, but I find this just quick and easy. Now I'm doing the sleeve, one of the sleeves, which I know goes right next to the skirt patterns because I'm constantly looking at that lay plan. And just there I was marking in, I was cutting in the pattern notches, so I was nicking the fabric, no more than like 4 millimeters, or definitely less than 1/4 of an inch, like 1/8 of an inch or a bit more would be fine, so that when you come to sew your sleeves into the armholes, you can match up those nicks and it all goes easy and smooth. And one thing to mention about sleeves is that absolutely make sure that you cut up here. So you need a left and a right sleeve. So you cut one with the pattern piece up and one with the pattern piece down. Okay, and now I'm cutting out the ruffles. I know that you have to put those on the fold, so I'm doing that now. And again, just folding the fabric when and where I need it is quite easy. As long as you've got the lay plan sort of close by that you can keep looking at it. This dress is not very complicated. There's not that many pattern pieces, so it's not too hard. Right, now I'm cutting out these ruffles, and there is a notch there and there, so I'm just making sure I put those nicks in, cutting away any scraps. And now I'm going to cut out the bodices, the center, front and back bodice. So here is the center front bodice that's cut on the fold, using my scissors as a weight to keep the pattern in place. And if you're lucky enough to have pattern weights, that's fantastic, but I tend to use just whatever's lying around. Right, now I'm cutting out the centre back bodice, which is not cut on the fold, but it is cut a pair. So you can see I've just split the fabric, and then I'm putting the pattern right up against the edge of the split there. So that once I've cut it out, I've actually got a matching pair. And one thing to mention about my fabric is that it's one way. It's not a two-way fabric. So if I rotated that fabric around 180 degrees, it would look different because it's got a little motif that in the little paisley motif are all pointing the same way. So I cannot cut my fabric out two-way. So all the pattern pieces need to be going in the same way. The grain lines on the pattern pieces, they have an arrow pointing down, so it's pointing down towards the hem. So if you have one-way fabric, you need to be quite careful about that. Otherwise, when you make it up, it's going to look a bit strange. Here I'm cutting out the neck binding. These are annoying little pattern pieces that you know, sort of chew up fabric, and they're right in the center of the lay. But I do like a self bias as opposed to a contrast bias. I think it looks more professional, and it's just, you know, one less fabric that you need to add to your garment. And here I'm marking out the side bodices. Now make sure that you have got the correct front and back side bodice. There's a different one for view A and for view B. So that has tripped up some people, I've noticed. I've had a few emails about that. And with the updated Evie pattern, they're very, very clearly labelled. So please pay attention to that. Otherwise, you may find that your sleeves don't go in, or your sleeveless dress has quite wide shoulders. Okay, so just cutting those out. And if I'm cutting a pair singly, when I bundle the fabric pieces together, I will put right sides together, and that's just sort of a checking system to make sure that you're cutting pairs. It's very frustrating when you get to do the sewing and you've cut two the same way. Okay, now I'm cutting the other bodices. I've just got another weight there, which is actually a meat tenderizer from the kitchen. It's quite handy, it's quite heavy. Okay, and then just finishing off these side bodices and putting in the notches. And here I'm folding the pattern at the grain line so that I can see where the grain line is when I flip the pattern piece over. It's really important to keep your grain line straight. And of course, straight being parallel with the selvage. Right, okay. Just putting in the nicks at the pattern notches now, and that's it. So I'm everything that's in a pair, I'm bundling them so that the pairs are together. So you've got the side bodices, the neck binding, the front and back bodices, the ruffles, pairing the sleeves together, and here I'm just getting the skirts right side together with there's a neck right in the waist edge, which I'm making sure I've got the pieces the right way.